Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Josh Black, a senior concept artist at Stoke Games, and I also teach figure drawing and anatomy here on my YouTube channel, where I share process videos on how I approach the figure, and I also try to give tips and advice on what types of exercises artists can do to improve at their drawing and painting skills every day. In addition to that, I also have tutorials, brush packs, and ebooks available on my Gumroad and also on Proco, which, by the way, right now is doing their summer sale where everything's 20% off. I'll leave the link below if you're interested in checking that out. Today's video, I wanted to do a value study painting of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was by far, well, is by far my favorite action hero from the 80s. Being a child of the 80s, I I loved watching his movies growing up. I love his one-liners, his infamous one-liners, and uh, I think my favorite film that he was in had to be Predator, and still is, I think, one of the best action movies of all time. Uh, anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with a basic lay-in, and then we'll develop the form and structure of the figure and the anatomy, and then dive into painting and breaking up the values. So, all right, let's get started. Okay, so with the gesture, or the lay-in, I should say, we're going to focus first on just the overall rhythms and flows of the figure. I'm kind of getting the skeleton established that we're going to build everything else on top of. So here I'm just getting kind of that curved line and showing the flow of the arms. And you can see his screen right arm is actually tilted a little bit higher than the left arm. So I'm almost creating a shape there. Almost looks like a windshield on a car. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and block in the cranium. And then just rough in his jawline so I can find the neck muscle, indicate how it flows into the pit of the neck. That will help me find the top of the rib cage. I can get that C curve of the front of the rib cage. And I'm going to do a little simple egg shape for the mass of the rib cage. I'll come down and establish the waistline. And shrink this down so it's more closely matching our reference here. And I'm going to go ahead and block in his swimsuit here, his lower swimsuit. I guess just the swimsuit. Obviously, he doesn't have the upper swimsuit. And I want to indicate kind of the tilt of the pelvis there. And now we can find the gesture of the legs. And I like to start off with a simple tapered shape just to get me something to build off of. And I'm going to get the curve of this leg and find the base of the foot. I'm just going to use a simple wedge shape to indicate that left foot there. Again, just using simple tapered shape there. Shrink down his pelvis there. And I'm going to indicate now the base of the love handles, the external obliques. I'll get the curve of his lats. The one on the left actually forms more of a straight at this point. I'm going to find the base of the chest as it fixes into the rib cage there. Indicate the traps, the back of the neck. Now I'm going to find the gesture of the abdominal shield, the rectus abdominis. Establishing the waistline. You can see his pelvis is pretty parallel to the ground. Find the base of the crotch. Save that. And I'm going to do simple little spheres just to indicate the placement of his hands. Do little dash marks to indicate the base of his elbows. Blocking out his massive triceps there. Yeah, you can see the base of his rib cage protruding out quite a bit. And then the lats, latissimus dorsi overlapping the serratus there. It's a slight indication of his nipples. So we'll want to do a gestural line connecting those to make sure they're symmetrical. So here you can clearly see that the base of the chest inserts into the rib cage there, and that's fixed. That's not going to go anywhere. But everything here on the side can deform quite a bit as it stretches with his arms being raised. It's a good place to save. So you can see that midline. I moved it over to the right just a little too far. So I need to fix that. Block out his left deltoid. You can see the clavicles there overlap the medial deltoids. Create some nice depth there. Make sure those armpits match up to one another. Alright, so I can see already that the left arm needs to come out further. So I'm just going to use my transform tool and pull that out. So you can see the hand's actually just above the bicep there. block out his massive bicep there. There we go. Block out the one on the right. You can see that strong separation between the mass of the biceps and the mass of the triceps. Those really nice core shadows, separating the lights and the darks. Little shadow there underneath. So you can see that the biceps and the triceps also have a symmetrical design where the peaks, the peak of the mass of the biceps more on the left and the peak of the tricep is more on the right. So you want to pay attention to that. That asymmetry will definitely add a lot of will make it look a lot more interesting and help you avoid the dreaded sausage look. Tricep comes down even more. These things are huge. Got a nice core shadow there. Duplicate the cast shadows over here. And we can see the serratus muscles right here on the left. And here also on the right, they're easier to see. It's kind of fun. It's like putting together a puzzle at this point. Now let's save it again, and then we'll just keep moving forward. Maybe we should finish the upper body. Kind of tempted to move down to the legs. Right here we got a nice cast shadow underneath the right oblique. And I like to use a very thin, crisp line to indicate the cast shadow. And then a core shadow. There's a quick cast shadow over here of his arm, casting a shadow over his lat, his right lat. And start blocking out his forearms here on his left arm. Alright, getting the gesture of the knuckle line of his hand. You can see I'm really just simplifying that quite a bit before I go in and break it up into smaller shapes. You can see the thumb tucked underneath those knuckles, the secondary knuckles of the fingers. So yeah, I can see I need to move his hand over. It's more lined up just above his bicep. Make his hand just a little too big. Erase that out and redefine the contours of his flexor muscles. I'm probably gonna go back and finesse the shapes of his hand there. Um, I made the fingers a little too long. So shorten those. There we go. Right. So yeah, I still want to go back in and clean that up. see there's that slight bifurcation of the bicep muscles. Just want to indicate that a little bit. We got the mid downs. All right, I'm getting a little carried away with the details here. Okay, we need to move to his other arm. When we go to the textured square brush and start rendering, I think we'll go ahead and render this. I think it'll be a fun one to render. We can really clean it up more. Find the values and highlights better. Again, just establishing the gesture of the fist. I should just leave that fist. We'll go back to it. Yeah, we need to move its forearm to the right. It's definitely too close. All right. Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of establishing his upper torso and his arms. We need to obviously do the rest of the figure. But I think I'm gonna continue this tomorrow. It's getting kind of late. Well, I'm going to save this and wrap this up tomorrow. All right, I think we're going to move on to the legs at this point. And I'm going to start with the screen right leg. One of the flows that I want to make sure lines up is I can see the belly button, the navel, kind of lines up with the medial side of the adductors here. So I want to make sure I'm getting that flow. And then getting that strong overlap of the vastus internus of the quads overlapping the adductors. And then here we have the rectus femoris of the quads. Kind of interesting, you can see kind of that bifurcation of the rectus femoris, where there's that like strong vertical furrow running down the middle of that muscle. And you see that more with bodybuilders, where they just have crazy exaggerated leg muscles. And I want to pay attention to the alignments of the muscles and landmarks from leg to leg to make sure they're going to be lined up. So I'm kind of matching the base of those vastus internus muscles, using that as a guide and reference to block out the gesture of the muscles on the other leg. And I think at this point I want to block out the knees. Remember, you have the patella right there, and then it's connected to the tibia below, the tibial protuberance, which is this little bony landmark right there on the lower leg by the tibial band or tendon. Here I'm following the gesture of the sartorius muscle. Blocking out the vastus externus, or the vastus lateralis, which means it's on the outside of the body, on the outside of the leg. And as always, I'm trying to exaggerate those overlaps, those areas of overlap, just to help create more depth in the drawing. So here you can see that the rectus femoris is overlapping the vastus lateralis. So I want to be sure that is illustrated here. I kind of like to exaggerate it first and then go back in and tone it down later. Make the statement strong, and then I can worry about the subtlety of it later. I can see here the knees are also lined up pretty well. Looks like the knee on the right is slightly higher. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit more of a tilt there. I want it to indicate. And here we can kind of see the base of the condyles of the femur. And they kind of rest right behind the patella. And the patella is the kneecap. All right, I think that's feeling pretty good so far on the quads. I may have to shorten them a little bit because I can see his lower legs are a little bit taller than I've made him. So I'm just going to use the transform tool and just move those up a little bit. There we go. All right, let's save this real quick, and then we'll move on to the lower legs. So see right here, we can actually see the bony landmark of the tibia, where the femur. I'm just going to draw this with orange. So we have the femur bone that comes down, probably comes down a little bit lower. I should probably do red. A bright red. There we go. So here we have the femur, the condyles of the femur. See, you can see that division line. And then just below, you can see the tibia. See that? That's always fun when you can so clearly see those anatomical landmarks. Here we can see that the medial ankle or malleolus is oriented higher than the lateral malleolus, the outside ankle. So here we can kind of see that tibialis anterior muscle, kind of oriented in front of the shin. And here we can see the peroneal muscles that sit in front of the gastrocnemius. So right here on the outside we see the gastrocnemius. And then sitting in front of it, right here, it's just a little sliver. We can barely see that's the peroneal muscles. Again, here we see the tibial protuberance. It's pretty defined. And you can see the calf muscles also have an asymmetrical design where the medial calf, the inner calf, is set lower than the lateral calf on the outside of the leg. And here you can see the tendon that's attached to the tibialis anterior that kind of flows into all the tendons that go into the toes. Um, Obviously, the toes here are blown out, so I kind of have to interpret what I'm seeing here. So I think I'm going to pull back the opacity there. That definitely got too stiff. So I'll go back in and draw that with a little more energy. Alright, that's starting to feel better. Yeah, and when we switch over to the textured brush, we'll finesse the rendering on on all of this. So up here we can see a nice separation of the tensor fascia lata, this muscle right here, overlapping the gluteus medius, which is right behind it, right there. Okay, I think it's feeling pretty good so far. The nice thing is, like, since we spent the time to really establish the structure and the anatomy, when we go in and do a rough rendering with the textured square brush, a lot of the work's already going to be done for us, and um, we can be a lot more gestural with those brush strokes because we have a strong kind of map that lays out everything for us. All right, let's save this. Kind of see that boxy structure of his calves. So here we see that tibialis anterior muscle again. And we can see the tibial protuberance. And it's kind of overlapping right there. So I want to make sure I indicate that overlap. Again, that's going to give us more depth. So here we can see the medial side of the blade of the shin. We can see the arch of the medial side of the foot, which really differentiates it from the lateral side of the foot, which is more flat. You don't really see that arch quite as much. Then we have the mass of the calcaneus on the heel of the foot. And then back here, we have the Achilles tendon that attaches the gastrocnemius and the soleus down into the calcaneus. Clean up those quads a little bit. Pull that up. So it's kind of fun, like once you get to a certain point, it's like you're just fine tuning everything and deciding where to make things pop, where to accentuate overlap, and where you need to kind of clean up the line. Sometimes I like to add like just a little dot where there's a planar change in the muscles, but I don't want to angle it too harshly. I'm going to block out gesture of the big toe. And see how the big toe kind of like almost kind of turns upward a little bit, and then the other toes actually kind of point down into the ground. just going to indicate the front of that toenail. We'll clean that up more later. Just do a little ellipse to kind of show the perspective of the floor. And darken his swimsuit. All right, I think that's feeling pretty good. Let's save it, and then we're gonna try to get his face in there, hopefully get a likeness. I mean, it is Arnold, we don't want to mess that up. And then we'll probably go try to clean up the hands. All right. Okay, I need to save this. Like already starting to see the rendering. I need to stop because we're going to take care of that later. Okay, save this and then we'll block in his head. All right, so let's get started on the face. First, I want to make sure I'm getting the gesture of the neck correct. And then I'm going to try to see that the top of his head kind of lines up with the hand at this angle. And I'm going to use some soft straight lines to block out the silhouette of his hair. The nice thing about using those straights instead of the curves is it helps you find those planar changes easier and those angles. It's structural angles, and then you can always go back in and finesse those shapes with some curves later, but at least you have a strong, solid foundation to work on. And it's a little easier to find the shapes, I think, using straights than curves. So here I'm just getting this brow line and the eye line. And go back and keep blocking out his hair. At the base of his ear. I'm getting my glabella in between his eyes. And now I'm just blocking out his nose. I'm just trying to think of all the shapes as little graphic shapes that fit into each other. Just kind of defining the outer borders of his eyes. And Arnold has very pronounced cheekbones. Just doing a rough separation of the lights and darks in his hair. And let's go ahead and block in his jawline. So I can already see his head's getting a little big because I'm running out of space here. I'm just going to select all of that. Okay, that feels better. I'm going to start blocking out his upper lip shape. So you can see the upper lip forms the Cupid's bow. Just like a bow that's kind of lying on its side. And where the philtrum feeds into the upper lip, it's kind of where the handle of the bow is. It's almost like a flattened out M shape. Just block out the lower lip. And then we can see in the corners, that line kind of flattens out just a little bit. Mm. In the back of the jaw. Blocking out the temporal ridge right there on the side of his head. And there's just like a soft plane that connects the temporal ridge to his cheekbones there. And then a core shadow that's kind of formed by the protrusion of his masseter muscle. I can see its angle change comes back forward once it about lines up with the mouth, the corner of the mouth. All right, let's save it again, and then we'll try to wrap this up. The basic structure, again, I want to go ahead and clean this up with a rendering pass, or we'll just clean up the line. Okay, again, I'm seeing his head is just a little too big. So I'm going to go ahead and select that with the lasso tool and shrink it down just a hair more. And I can see that I got the tilt wrong. His eyes are kind of tilted more at an angle. There we go. Now that I move the head, I gotta adjust the neck because it's not feeding to the back of his skull quite right. It needs to be moved to the left, and there we go. Now it's starting to look more like Arnold. Just gonna start roughing in some values. You can see Arnold also has a very pronounced jowls. That strong cast shadow under his earlobe. And a core shadow on the back of his neck. And yeah, we should probably erase some of that. All right, I think it's already starting to look like Arnold. Do you think we need to tilt his head a little bit? Maybe his forehead is getting be a little too small there. So we're just going to use this again just to tilt. Okay, let's save it, and then we'll flesh out his face, and then we'll start rendering with the textured square brush. This is definitely a much longer video than I was planning, but it's just been a lot of fun kind of figuring out all of his muscles and blocking everything in. And again, to me, it's almost like putting together a puzzle. It's just a lot of fun finding all the relationships of all the muscles and different masses of the figure. Okay, let's save that. Then we'll finish his face. Okay, so I can see from a distance that this cheekbone needs to be lower set. Okay, now it's already looking more like him. All right. So now I just want to get the framing of his eyes. Kind of getting that shape of the upper eyelid. And I recommend doing that with straights initially. And then make sure those straights kind of flow into each other. Let's see. Yeah, and Arnold has very pronounced brow, the superciliary eminence. And I'm going to try to just block out the pupils. trying to do this without zooming in too much. So I have to be very kind of cautious to shrink down my brush quite a bit. So I'm just trying to get some of that vascularity on the temple plate of his side of his head. Yeah, I think we're starting to get more of a likeness here. And just carefully add the upper eyelid on the left eye. Capture the angle change of that eyebrow. Go to define his jowls a little bit more. So I want to make sure that the shadow shapes are not matching my midtones on the light side. So I'm going to go in there and darken those. Okay, we are getting closer. I'm just paying attention to the shape now of that core shadow under his chin, on his jaw. Okay, so I think we did a pretty good job blocking out his face. Um, so now we'll want to go in and start cleaning up the render. I'm going to use the soft or the textured square brush. Um, see, I am noticing, however, that this hand here needs to be just a little smaller. Okay, that feels pretty good. Um, so yeah, I mean, it definitely took a lot more time. This is about an hour and a half to block this in, but we just took our time to get things established with the structure, the proportions, and the anatomy, and I think we did a decent job with getting the likeness. Um, and the line work is a bit messy, so hopefully when we go back in and start rendering this, we can kind of clean up everything with the brush strokes and the texture and the line work to give it a more finished look. Before we do that, I just wanted to again go over some of the anatomy. So here, of course, we have the pectoralis major. There on both sides. And then here we have the abdominal shield. And that's encased by the rib cage, which we can see here. Sorry, I'm not trying to draw this super well. I'm just roughing it in for you guys. And then here we have the serratus muscles, the latissimus dorsi right there. Here's the external obliques. The sartorius muscle. Those are the adductors, and then this is the quadricep group, which includes the rectus femoris, the vastus internus or vastus medialis, and the vastus externus or vastus lateralis. And here we have the patella, the gastrocnemius, the tibialis anterior muscle, and here's the tendon that it flows into. And again, those peroneal muscles on the lateral side of the calf. The bicep muscles, and then underneath that you have the brachialis. The tricep muscles, these are the flexors, and on the outside we have the extensors of the forearm. And here we have the sternocleidomastoid muscles. Here we have the zygomatic arch of the face. Here we have the jowls, the glabella, And again, this is that midline to help divide the figure and the torso in half, also known as the symmetry line. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more we could go over. I just wanted to highlight some of the anatomy that we covered. Oh, and here, of course, the tensor fascia lata. And then here we have the gluteus medius. Again, both on the lateral side of the hips. And yeah, now I think we're ready to go in, and we'll just render and clean this up. Hey, so you could probably tell I sped up the video here. I realized this video had already gone over 2 hours, so for the sake of time, I sped up the rendering process, and I'm just going to add some music, so hopefully you can enjoy that while you watch the rendering process until the finished product at the very end. I really am very grateful for all of you who've tuned in to the end and who've supported me so much throughout my journey at figuring out how to do these YouTube videos. I know there's still much room for me to improve, and I always love to hear your feedback and your comments on how I can do so. My goal is to continue to improve the content and make it more useful for all of you. So again, thank you for tuning in to the end, and until the next video. Okay, bye.